All right, recording. What's up, YouTube? Hey, everyone. It's your boy Hyde, and I'm here today with Matt Kingstone. Matt is actually he's helped me along, with my path to becoming a pen tester. And I thought that this video would be great because we're going to talk about a few things, but not just from the perspective of me as an up-and-comer, but also as Matt, who is a seasoned penetration tester. And all this kind of came by with my recent failure in the OSCP, and Matt gave me a lot of awesome insight into what you should take away from it, which I think would be really helpful for those of you that are looking to get into the field. So Matt, thanks for taking the time out, and why don't you just go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm a senior penetration tester. What I focus mainly on is red teaming, adversarial emulation, purple teaming, and yeah, just all around adversarial emulation, things of that nature.
Awesome. So Matt's been in the field for how many years have you been in the field for now?
Well, I've been doing IT for about 5 years, almost 6 years. I've been doing offensive security for 4 years, and I've been doing the red teaming for about 2 years now.
Awesome. Okay, so with this video, what we're really going to focus on is failure. And so, Matt, let me ask you this. What was your first failure when you were getting into InfoSec?
Yeah, sure. So that's a good question. So my first failure was actually after a few wins. I got my CompTIA trio, which back in 2014 was your A plus, your Net plus, your Security plus. I did pretty well on those certs, and I was sort of on top of the world when I got those certs, thinking, I got this in the bag, and so once I got those certs, I started studying for what's called the Microsoft MCSA. And the first failure that I actually had was with the Microsoft certification. When I did fail, I was devastated. I went into the testing facility with, I had been watching these videos and reading books and taking practice exams, and I really thought that I had everything in my head that I needed to know, and I didn't. And not only did I fail my MCSA, but I really did not do very well at all. The minimum passing score is 700 out of, I think, 900, maybe 1,000. I think my first score was 550 or something like that, and it was a pretty big blow. I was very discouraged.
That's not something that you really hear. I mean, from seasoned penetration testers such as yourself, but it's definitely reassuring to know that failure is always a part of making yourself successful in the end. So you failed, so how did you overcome it? Like how did you meet the failure? What would you have done differently, and what did you do to eventually pass?
So I dealt with the failure in a very unhealthy way. As a matter of fact, I took the test on a Saturday morning, and I was actually supposed to go to a friend's wedding later that day, but I was so just butthurt and being a baby about it that I didn't go to the wedding. I just kind of sat there and felt sorry for myself for the rest of the weekend, just thinking I'm the dumbest person in the world. How I got over it is a little bit interesting. I remember going back into the office on Monday, and some of the people that I worked with at the time They looked a little bit negatively upon people who did try to get certifications and move forward, get promoted, learn new technical skills and abilities. And there was sort of an attitude of, oh, you know, it's okay, it's okay, not a big deal. But I could sort of tell that deep down they were a little bit happy. They were a little bit happy to see me take that fall and to take that loss. And I saw through that, and I thought about what I wanted to do, which at the time I wanted to be a systems administrator for servers, you know, Windows and Linux and things like that. And I thought to myself, I was like, well, I can just sit here and feel sorry for myself, or I can study harder and I can get that certification and I can move beyond and eventually get the MCSA, which is actually 3 tests combined into 1 certification. So that's what I did. I reached into my savings. I bought more books. I studied harder. I studied longer. And you know what? I failed again. I failed it 2 times. But you know what though? The second time I failed it, I had a 675 out of 700, which was 1 question away from failing. And with the Microsoft certifications, when you take those certifications and you either pass or fail, at the bottom of the certification, it tells you these are the areas that you need to focus on next time because you answered questions incorrectly based on these particular subjects. So I did that, and I studied harder, and I calloused my mind, and you know, I put in some late nights. I sacrificed time on the weekends with friends and family, and the girl that I was dating at the time. And the third time I took it, I killed it. I did a really good job. And what would I do different? Honestly, I don't think I would do anything different. If I could go and talk to myself back in that time, I would probably be a little bit more reassuring, like, hey, it's okay to fail. But at that particular time, most of the blogs and things like that around certifications were people just saying how they always pass the first time, they always get a really high score the first time, how smart they are. And me having imposter syndrome at the time and just dealing with all of these incredibly smart people and not feeling up to snuff once I actually passed the test with, I think I had like an 820, which is pretty good. I really took a good look in the mirror and said, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, you did fail, but you picked yourself up, and now you have this piece of paper. And I continued that with the other 2 certifications, and eventually got my MCSA and got promoted over all of the people that just decided they were happy where they were at.
That's awesome, and I can definitely relate to the imposter syndrome that you talk about in InfoSec, especially because you have like, maybe it's just me, but I feel like a lot of people, especially in cybersecurity, especially offensive security, there are definitely barriers to getting in and getting the knowledge, but at the same time, you know, it's not as easy as just, you know, studying, following a manual and, you know, taking that route and just getting good at it. You know, it requires a different kind of thinking. So for people like me, I know I personally have felt many times that, you know, hey, you don't have 6 months or even 3 months of professional IT experience. You're just studying for these certs and you're getting them. And when I failed the OSCP, I actually suffered from imposter syndrome pretty hardcore. I was thinking, maybe I'm not ready, because all I'm doing is I'm going on LinkedIn and I'm seeing people who are talking about how they passed it the first time, and you know that, you know, it wasn't as bad as people say it was, or I'm seeing people pass it, but they have years and years of experience. So I guess since I mentioned the OSCP, why don't we talk about that for a minute? So you have your OSCP, right, Matt?
I do, yeah.
So can you just briefly talk us through, like, did you pass it the first time? You know, what did you do to improve? And, you know, I guess just stuff along that line.
Yeah, the OSCP was very hard for me. I jumped into it way too soon. I hadn't hacked a thing in my life, um, any of that, and I jumped straight into it with 3 months of lab time. You know, fully ego, like I'm gonna get this, just like I got my Microsoft cert and my certified ethical hacker. LOL. And
Uh,
I went into it and I got my butt kicked. And I'm sure anybody that might be watching this or listening to this knows that a lot of those offensive security forums, people are savage. They are not very nice. Um, when it comes to, you know, hey, I kind of need some help. For instance, I was doing things like trying to catch interpreter shells with netcat, and it sort of catches it a little bit, but you don't get interact. Just weird, dumb, noobish sort of stuff. And yeah, I spent maybe 6 months going after it. And when I took the test the first time, I will tell you this: I didn't sleep the night before. When I did take the test, I didn't do terrible. As a matter of fact, I could have passed the test if I would have known things like you can get points for having a good what is it, the lab practice stuff, as well as like a good exam, as well as a couple of other things that you can sort of prepare for in advance. I could have actually passed the first time, but I didn't know these things, and I failed it. And I didn't even submit my report or anything like that. And yeah, sure enough, I got that. I got that email from offensive security. Just, hey, you didn't pass. Sorry. And yeah, I actually went through that iteration. I failed it a second time. The second time I was very close. The third time I failed it again. I just kept getting these machines that just I was not good with. You know, I would adjust fire and focus on something else to study on. Like, oh, there's this box here that has SQL injection. So maybe I need to hone my skills with better manual SQL injection, or maybe I need to hone my skills with different file upload vulnerabilities, things like that. I kept trying it, and really what it came down to was time management, making sure that I took those breaks, doing reconnaissance better and more automated. On top of reconnaissance, not looking too deeply into certain things. Like sometimes I would see a weird port and I would just follow that rabbit hole for 6 hours, and it had nothing to do with the actual exploit or any kind of path into the machine. It was very disheartening too, because at the time I really wanted to get into a penetration testing position, and I had gotten through all of the offensive security labs. I was really good with everything from web stuff to network stuff to pivoting between networks. I had a very good understanding, but sure enough, even the fourth and final time that I actually took that test, all of those things put together, the honing your time management skills, dealing with your past failures, learning from your past failures and what you could have done better, and also seeing it to the end. You know, not quitting just because you have 45 minutes left on the test, and just trying the hardest that you can up until the very end, so that whether you pass or fail, when you get that email saying whether you do pass or fail, you know that you worked your hardest and you did everything that you can do, and understanding that, hey, if you do fail, it's just a stepping stone to success.
Yeah, that's big. And I know me personally, when when I failed, you and I talked, and I definitely had to hear that because, especially because the OSCP was my first real professional failure as I'm kind of transitioning out of the military into infosec. So, hearing that, this certification isn't necessarily built for most people to pass the first time is something I think everyone needs to know and understand, and that it's okay to fail. And yeah, I took like a day off and kind of just sat in front of the TV and did nothing. But after that, I was just, itching to get back. So, but we're in such a certification rat race.
Mhm.
So I think, with, you have, the way I see it is you have two different kinds of certifications. You have, what I like to call the brain dump certs, and, I'll try to avoid, calling out any companies or vendors, but I think we all know who they are, where those are considered your starting point, and people do well on them because a lot of it is just study, 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 memorize, and then take the test, and then brain dump, and you're done. Versus when you start to take these practical exams, like when I first started, I started with eLearn Securities, EJPT, and ECPBT. Those were actually pretty challenging for me. And I don't really know how I passed those, but I did. But the OSCP is definitely different. So I guess, what is your opinion on these brain dump certs versus, stuff like what eLearn Security and OSCP, offensive security, are putting on?
Well, I like the brain dump certs. I've got a few other people that I help mentor, and I mean, they're not ready for any kind of practical certification. So things like the A plus, the Net plus, Security plus, and now luckily, people are so lucky now because there's the Cybersecurity Analyst Plus certification. There's the Pentester Analyst Plus, and people can take these certifications and at least learn the vocabulary. And if they go into a workplace situation where people are talking about things, maybe hardware, a conversation about hardware, and you have your A plus, you at least understand what people are talking about. Is it replacement for real life experience? Obviously not. But it's a great way to get your foot in the door because you're probably spending your own money, you're spending time on the weekends, you're learning something new, and you're putting forth an effort to get your foot in the door to get one of these entry level jobs. When it comes to offensive security, I'm a really big fan of the practical certifications. For instance, if you came to work on my team and you had an offensive security certification that is just multiple choice, that's cool, but I'm probably going to still give you some kind of practical test during the interview just to see, do you know how to answer a question about INMAP on a multiple choice question test, or can you actually sit behind a keyboard on a command line terminal and actually run INMAP intelligently against a host or a range of hosts and actually begin to chip away and enumerate and find those vulnerabilities? So I think both brain dump certification, I don't want to say brain dump because maybe that's not the correct term, but multiple choice certifications that are not quite as challenging as practical certifications like the OSCP. I think they both have their place, and honestly, a really good way to start is maybe get a couple of those multiple choice certifications and see what you like. Maybe you don't want to do the pen test stuff because it's not for everybody. Maybe you don't want to do the cybersecurity analyst stuff. That's not for everybody, but you can at least kind of get an idea of what the job is like, what the vocabulary is, what people do. And once you start actually getting those skills and you get that real life experience, for me, the practical certifications really are the way to go.
Awesome. So you as kind of a hiring manager of sorts, you're you wouldn't necessarily discount if someone has these multiple choice certifications, but if they have something like the ECPPT or the OSCP, it obviously kind of
Mhm.
helps prove, that they know what to do hands on. Um, so how do you feel about, um, I guess, so offensive security, they just changed their pricing and
Mhm.
um, and eLearn Security's pricing is also, a little higher than what it used to be. So
Mhm.
how do you how do you feel about certifications, in terms of them being like revenue generators for companies? Like, is that something that us as up and comers need to take heed of, or like how would we approach that, if at all?
Well, I mean, obviously, certification companies don't want to make less money. I do believe that some certifications are not really meant to be passed the first time by the general public. I do, and this is just a personal opinion. I think the OSCP is one of those certifications, but when you do get that certification, it's that much sweeter. As far as recurring fees every year, every other year, I don't necessarily agree with it. For instance, I have my CompTIA certifications, and at this point in my career, is it really worth continuing to pay hundreds of dollars or whatever it is to maintain these certifications? I don't really know. I would say that if you're in a job market and you do apply for a company and you do, let's say that maybe you just got a couple of CompTIA certifications, maybe you went to some kind of a boot camp that's a few weeks long and it actually includes 3 different certification tests or something, and then you go work somewhere. I think an important question to ask a potential employer is, uh, do you pay for continuing education? You know, credits and certs and fees due to these organizations like CompTIA or ISC or EC Council. I think that is very important because if you work for a company that doesn't pay for any of this stuff, uh, it can be pretty expensive. I know the CISSP renewal fees are pretty expensive. The CompTIA fees are expensive. The EC Council fees are expensive, and if you're paying that every 3 years, it can be 500 or $1,000 or whatever. So it can be pretty pricey. So that's another thing that you might want to think about when you're getting certifications. Another thing that you might want to think about when getting certifications too is, how are you going to maintain that certification once you get it? Is it a certification that you're going to have forever? Or within a couple of years, do you have to retest? Or do you have to not just retest, but retest for a certification by that provider at a higher level, such as like Cisco, right? You get your CCNA, and then later you have to go and get like a CCNP or retest for the CCNA. So those are all things I think that should be considered when you're figuring out what your career path is going to be and what certifications you're going to pursue in order to get to that career path of your choice.
Sure. And I will say this, um, as someone who's actually starting to actively look for jobs, just having the certifications is not enough to even warrant an interview. I know a lot of jobs that I'm applying to, they actually have pre-screening questions where they say, this is an entry-level role. Do you have 7 years experience in, whatever? So I'm not gonna lie. So I say no, and then I get like an auto response saying,
Mm.
"Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't fit," and that's fine. But it's kind of important to keep that in mind as well. So um, I guess since we're on the topic of certifications, what if you could offer someone advice in terms of what certifications to pursue getting into for someone who wants to get into pen testing or red teaming down the road, given whatever is out there right now, what would you recommend, in what order, and kind of why or why not?
If you want to get into penetration testing, my best advice is two parts. One, go with eLearn Security. Spend the extra money. Opt in for the unlimited lab time, whether it's the junior penetration testing course, which I've never actually taken, the professional penetration testing course, which I have taken and I highly recommend, as well as sign up for Hack the Box. There are some insane walkthroughs and tutorials on Hack the Box by guys like, I forget what his name is, but online his name is IPSEC. This guy is incredibly smart, and he's showing you all these crazy ways to get into all these different boxes. He shows you multiple ways to get into boxes, and the price to learn what he's doing and see his methodology is worth an exponential amount more than what you're actually going to pay on Hack the Box to access those machines. So that's just my personal opinion. And that's if you really want to do pen testing. If you're not sure if you want to do pen testing, my suggestion might be to maybe even go the CompTIA route and just sort of look at like the Pen Test Analyst Plus and the Cybersecurity Analyst Plus, for the simple fact that I've had people that have stated they want to do pen testing or they want to do red teaming or something like that, and then they kind of see what's behind it. It's like, hey, yeah, it's a lot of fun. You find remote code execution, or you pop a shell or something along those lines. But in the real world, not everything is exploitable in the amount of time that you're given on an engagement. So if you're doing a web application assessment, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find SQL injections everywhere and all this other stuff everywhere. And you honestly spend a lot of time doing reconnaissance and a lot of time in a command line terminal, and not a lot of people understand that you're going to be doing that, and people can get bored very, very easily. So if you're sort of unsure, I would probably go the CompTIA route. If you're definitely sure, Hack the Box and eLearn are great places to start. If you really like pain, maybe go the OSCP route after the eLearn Security route, because it's very similar, but there's a lot of differences, and it teaches you a different way of thinking as well. So that's sort of the advice that I give most people that want to get into it.
Sure. And yeah, I noticed you talk a lot about eLearn Security and not much about the OffSec certs. So I guess as someone who has gone through PWK and taken the OSTP ones already, I will say this, like for me personally, in terms of preparing and doing the whole try harder thing that they love preaching, I'm actually focusing only on Hack the Box now, and actually watching a lot of IPSEC's videos and taking notes, because practice doesn't make perfect, but you don't have to be perfect. All you have to do is pass. So it doesn't sound like you really you like the OSCP as much as eLearn Security certs. So why is that?
I wouldn't say that. It's just the way that I sort of look into it is, when I did the OSCP, I was fresh out of Afghanistan. I was single. I worked night shift. I pretty much didn't have a life for about a year and a half. So me getting the OSCP is not a big deal. But a lot of people, they have a wife, they have kids, they have full-time jobs, they have stuff that they have to do. And I've known people who are in those situations and they go after the OSCP and they fail and they give up, and the lab time is pretty expensive. The tests are pretty draining. So generally, I try to steer people in the direction of e-learn security first, just because they have unlimited lab time. The test is like a week long. So if you do have life, if you do have kids, if you do have a job, you can still take the test successfully without it straining other areas of your life. And also, all the material in the e-learn courses that I've taken so far have more or less contained the answers that you need, or the material that you need in order to pass the test. And I found that not to be true with the offensive security certifications that I've taken. I did take my OSCP back in 2016. I know some changes have been made in the lab environments and the course materials, so it might have gotten a lot better. I can't really speak on that. But generally, before OSCP, I really try to encourage people to maybe go for the ECPPT first. I know that I wish I had done that, because when I jumped straight into the OSCP, I really didn't know anything what I was doing at all. And then when I went into the ECPPT, I thought to myself, wow, okay, well, they're telling me which Nmap scans to run. They're telling me what I need to do. They're telling me the steps to exploitation. There's a lab environment that I'm going to try myself. And if I'm unsuccessful, they actually have a solutions portion in the end. So I understand that offensive security is all about trying harder. But for me and my lack of experience, I needed a little bit more of hand-holding.
Sure. So what would you say to someone who's, because I know there's a lot of people out there like myself who are trying to get into the field. Do you think it's worth for them to invest time and, $1,400 into trying to get the OSCP to help them find a job? Or do you think we're at a point where employers aren't really too hung up on the OSCP?
The OSCP is definitely a coveted certification. You literally can't go wrong if you have the OSCP. Everybody in the offensive security field knows what it is. Everyone knows that it's hard. I think the e-learn security certifications are getting a lot of traction, and in my opinion, are equally as valid for an entry-level position for any kind of penetration testing. I think that question is a good one, but my best response is, hey, whether you go the offensive security route or you go the e-learn security route, once you finish and you actually get those letters behind your name and you have that certification, I think any technical hiring manager that sees that you have these certifications already knows, like, okay, this person has this practical cert. It's not a super easy certification. And I know that if I hire them, when I put them behind the keyboard or maybe team them up with some kind of a senior operator or something else, they can perform. They're not just going to sit there with their minds blank because they're so used to those multiple choice question certifications where you don't actually get that experience on a keyboard.
Sure. Well, I know we did talk about keeping this, under a half hour. I think there's actually a lot that we still probably could talk about, but I guess we'll save that for another video.
Yeah.
But, I guess in closing, like, the point that Matt and I both really wanted to drive home is, it's okay to fail, and that's something that I had to learn, not really the hard way, but, through OSCP failure. I learned that this past week, and especially because penetration testing, from what I understand, is not an easy, it's like the OSCP is an entry-level certification, but entry-level for penetration testing is like, you're doing advanced IT work already. I mean, so it's okay to fail. Matt, is there anything else that you want to tell, everyone before we sign off?
I think you summed it up perfectly. It's okay to fail. I took a certification last week. I failed. I destroyed the labs. I did really well. I got through all the labs in 4 or 5 hours or something like that. Then I took the test and I got my butt whipped. It's okay to fail. What's really important is getting back up, persevering, going past that, and also just the basic understanding that some of the certifications out there, I think there's a very small percentage of people that actually pass these things the first go around. I don't think it's publicized as much because people don't want to talk about, how badly they get their butt whipped. But for me, perseverance is golden. Getting back up, getting that certification, and learning those extra skill sets, it's the coolest thing in the world to me. So, awesome. Yeah, it's okay to fail.
Awesome, Matt. Well, thanks for your time, and everyone who's watching, I hope this video was helpful for you. If you did like it, please hit like, subscribe, and let us know so that we know to keep producing content. And if you hated it, let us know too. All right, see ya.
All right, thanks, Eddie. Bye-bye.